Welcome to the fourth video in the Tobacco Cessation Strategies for Special Populations series. This video will be geared towards strategies that will help with smoking cessation among African American populations. This video was created to accompany the African American Outreach Toolkit, which is currently available to tobacco prevention and control coalitions through the Texas Department of State Health Services. In case you are interested in receiving Certified Health Education Specialist continuing education credits, this video will focus on the following competencies. 1. How to involve priority populations, partners, and other stakeholders in the planning process. 2. How to use strategies to convene priority populations, partners, and other stakeholders. And 3. How to identify, develop, and deliver messages using a variety of communication strategies, methods, and techniques. Let's start by looking at some data. According to the U.S. Census Bureau in 2014, African Americans made up nearly 13% of the United States population. Among African Americans in 2013, 29.8% of adults reported current tobacco use. Currently, 21.8% of African American men and 15.4% of African American women 18 years and older are currently smokers. Smoking rates are also higher among African Americans of lower socioeconomic status. Additionally, tobacco companies have historically placed larger amounts of advertising in African American publications compared to white publications. Let's check in with Alton Burton, leader of the Brazos County Tobacco Prevention and Control Coalition, for some useful insights on smoking among African American populations.
My name is Alton Burton. I'm the Tobacco Prevention and Control Coordinator for BV-CASA. Most definitely feel like it's an issue. I think there are a couple of things that contribute to that. I think the media's and the tobacco companies' increased focus on marketing and targeting the populations definitely has an impact, as well as just a general lack of knowledge and education within the African American community.
To start off, it is important to make sure that we all understand some key terms that you are likely to hear when working with African American communities. A few of the key terms are presented here. First, African American refers to a descendant of African slaves who were brought to the United States. Black refers to all people and cultures of African descent, including but not limited to Black people from the West Indies, Africa, and the Americas. Culture is a learned system of knowledge and behaviors that are shared by a group of people. Finally, origin refers to the heritage or nationality of the person or person's parents before their arrival in the United States. In the introductory video of this series of presentations, we went over in detail the 5 steps for tobacco prevention and control coalitions to use when implementing smoking cessation strategies. During this presentation, we will focus on Step 2, which is developing strategies for outreach with special populations, in this case, the African American community.
I think the most important part is to really understand who you're dealing with, making sure that you have ears on the ground. I think oftentimes we feel that we are culturally competent based off of representation that we may have, and we have to understand that there are multiple cultures within a culture. So really understanding the population that you're trying to reach and tailoring that message to be appropriate.
Working with different populations provides opportunities to tailor outreach strategies so that efforts for smoking cessation can be the most effective. The following strategies were developed through conversations with members of African American communities and individuals who serve these communities. The first strategy is to work through community stakeholders to promote tobacco cessation. The TPCC Outreach Committee will play the primary role in identifying key community stakeholders who can help extend the coalition's local African American outreach efforts. Ideal community partners will include African American advocacy groups, organizations that serve the African American population, and social organizations. Endorsement and promotion of local TPCC activities from the African American community, establishes credibility among consumers, helps spread information through natural network ties, and ensures usability and effectiveness of smoking cessation strategies. The second strategy is to advertise the quit line in high-risk areas, an opportunity to lower the smoking rates within African American populations lies within high-risk communities. In these communities, the quit line should be advertised more frequently due to the higher smoking rates that are present. To identify these communities, online resources such as U.S. Census data can be used. The TPCC should work with the Department of State Health Services to devise a message and outreach campaign to utilize in these areas. The last community-specific strategy is to promote tobacco cessation through faith-based organizations. These organizations are places where members of the community sometimes go to get support for their cessation efforts. An outreach campaign could be done here by utilizing the church staff and leaders and having them spread a message that encourages smoking cessation. This is also a place where an event could be held to provide resources and information regarding cessation. When you begin to reach out to these organizations, make an effort to find the community outreach contact or prominent member of the church. The best point of contact will not always be the church leader. Once you have created appropriate messages, you will need to get those messages out to your community. As a TPCC, you may need to develop and implement African American specific media campaigns to promote tobacco cessation. TPCCs should use different types of media to convey messages to individuals. This might include printed media such as newspapers, magazines, or flyers, and electronic media such as online blogs, websites, and other advertisements. Let's start off by talking about printed media. Again, this includes newspapers, magazines, and flyers that can convey messages to your audience. Messages should be endorsed by creditable sources within the African American community, like social groups or local leaders. Effective advertising can increase knowledge, counteract myths, and motivate people to change behavior. Printed media should send a message that African American residents will benefit from not smoking and engage the audience in a way that is easily understood. It is important to note that one message will not appeal to every audience, so several messages should be developed that target African American smokers specifically. Other examples of print media would be posters raising awareness for services, billboards, or point-of-purchase posts which engage the consumer as they are making their decision whether or not to buy tobacco products. Next, let's talk about electronic media, which includes social media. In recent years, tobacco companies have shifted away from promoting their products through traditional media sources such as billboards and magazines, and instead focus on digital media and retail outlets. As a result, electronic media sources are especially important in promoting smoke-free messages. Online sources like Twitter, Facebook, other websites, blogs, or online advertisements are useful ways to share information about smoking cessation to a wide audience. Social media is another great way that you can build support and reach your intended target audience.
The African American church. So the church is the staple of the African American community. It's a symbol of trust. It's a symbol of community. So if you're able to establish a relationship and develop a rapport with a pastor's association, for example, or some members or key officials within the church system, it will definitely be a great inlet into provide some access to the community.
It is important to note that resources are always changing, so try to stay up to date with the resources and campaigns that are available to help you. For example, you might want to become familiar with the National African American Tobacco Prevention Network to see if you can utilize their messages and resources. Additionally, organizations such as the CDC have already developed resources that are meant for outreach with African American populations. One example seen here is the Pathways to Freedom education material to help with smoking cessation. There are also other organizations such as the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids that have also developed materials that explain the impact of tobacco in African American communities. These materials are important to not only give you some important context on the problem, but also offer some ideas on how to address the problem.
I think the biggest thing is to not be discouraged. You're going to have challenges, you're going to have setbacks. Continue to push, continue to work towards what you're trying to do, which is make your community an overall healthier community, and just stay focused.
As we talked about in the first video, there are ways to make sure that you stay on track with implementing your strategies for outreach, and always be sure to evaluate. That way you know what works best for the African American community in your area. Be sure to look back at the toolkit or the first video in this series to learn more about implementation and evaluation. Finally, it's also important to consider the sustainability of your efforts. The core elements for sustainability should include buy-in from key leaders and decision makers, leadership, resources and communication mechanisms, and processes to maintain operations or activities. These will differ based on your community and your strategies. For more information about sustainability, please see the introduction video in this series, or check out the toolkits found on the Texas Department of State Health Services website. As this training comes to a close, we hope that you feel ready to utilize strategies to help close the gap in health equity that exists in the African American community. Don't let your progress stop here. We have developed a few questions for you to consider. First, which strategy will be most useful in your community? Also, how can you adapt another strategy for your community? How will you implement your plan? And what is your plan for evaluation? Take 10 minutes to think through these questions on your own and then talk with your coalition about what you learned in this presentation. Brainstorm what you feel will work best in your community. For more information, be sure to look into the toolkit for African American community outreach. Thank you.